Hey there. Welcome to the So Does It Matter podcast. We're a podcast on California politics that goes in conjunction with our Substack at sodoesitmatter.com, where we're devoted all of the time to taking a hard look on California politics. I'm a constitutional conservative, but I call everything on balls and strikes, as you'll hear from this podcast today. On Fridays, every week, we publish a winners and losers of the week in politics in California. We comb through what's going on in the state capitol, in the major cities around California, even some of the smaller cities, what's going on in DC that has a California tilt to it. And we just look for which politicians or groups or organizations had particularly good weeks or particularly bad weeks. And this week, we've devoted our entire winners and losers column to Proposition 50, which, as you know, passed on Tuesday of this week with overwhelming numbers. And so we're going to talk about that. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you if you would consider doing a few things to help us out. Number one would be, depending on where you're watching this, to either restack it and like it, maybe even make a comment. If you're over on YouTube, would encourage you to subscribe and like. If you're listening to it on Apple Podcast or Spotify, give it a 5-star review. All those things help drive more people to see this. That now out of the way, I want to talk about winners of the week in California politics for the week ending the 7th of November. And we do 10 winners and losers. And so the first one by far on the list, pains me to say this because I didn't vote for him, I've never voted for him and will never vote for him, is California Governor Gavin Newsom. Talk about the winner of a best dramatic production in a ballot measure. This is a guy who on August sent an ex post directed at President Trump, basically saying, hey, if you guys redistrict Texas, we're going to redistrict California. And from there, in very short order, this is a guy who orchestrated pulling together the language, pulling together the maps, driving it through the legislature, helping out some legislative leaders with new House seats on the way, and then ultimately putting it on the ballot, astronomically raising astronomical amounts of money. According to the website today at the Secretary of State, $171 million has been raised. He raised so much money that at one point he stopped asking people to give. I should rephrase. He asked them to stop giving, which is more affirmative. And since then, he's been refunding money to some of the outside entities that have given. It was just an overwhelming but yet scary financial production. When I say scary, a big, huge chunk of the money that he raised comes from this kind of pay for play operation that they have, where public employee unions that are negotiating salaries, benefits, and other legislative achievements through the governor and the legislature, they gave big tens of millions of dollars. Private sector unions who again benefit from policies like AB 5, and I don't know, the latest was a new CEQA exemption measure that only got through if you're willing to pay the union prevailing wages for all your work. And then businesses that do business with or get money from the state of California. My favorite one to highlight is Reed Hastings, the former CEO of Netflix, who is now, I think, still their largest stockholder. He gave millions of dollars. And what's happened this year, just this year alone, Netflix has gotten tens of millions of dollars in tax credits, free to Netflix, free tax credits. So anyways, Gavin Newsom pulled all this together, got it done, got it passed, blew it out the doors earlier this week, and is going to be able to use his new fundraising base and his poll position so far in the presidential primaries for 2028 on the Democrat side to keep rolling the ball forward. He was the big winner this week. Let's move to a loser, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. I've known Kevin since our young Republican days. I think he's a very accomplished politician. He made the loser list here because out the gate, he kind of let it be known in quite a lot of places that he was going to not only fight this measure, but he was going to raise $500 million to do it. $500 million was what he said he would raise. He stood up an effort to start to do that. And it wouldn't be fair to say it fell on its face because I think he raised over $40 million, maybe even a little more, but fell far short of what he said he would do. And in politics, especially if somebody is a seasoned politician, you can become a loser by overpromising and underdelivering. And that's what happened here. He underdelivered and became a loser of the week. The next loser is none other than Arnold Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger and I are also someone, we have a bit of a relationship that goes back to the time that he was governor. On more than one occasion, I got to hang out in the smoking tent downstairs in the atrium of the Capitol. I find him to be a great human being, very nice guy. But back in the day, he made a big deal out of propositions. But it was Prop 20 and maybe it was Prop 18. I don't remember. Maybe it was 12. Anyways, the two ballot measures that ran while he was governor to reshape redistricting in California, both to create the independent commission and then to have that independent commission not only apply to the state legislative and Board of Equalization lines, but to have it apply to Congress, all happened under his watch since he's been governor. He's made a big deal about taking that legacy and rolling it out around the country and pursuing fair districts. When this measure came up, where was he? I mean, he went a little bit girly man on us, is what I would say. This is a guy who has the star power to film commercials. He has the star power to do huge earned media events all around the state. He has the money. He's worth the better part of $1 billion himself. He has the money to put some grub down to support opposing the measure. He did none of those things. He took a very hands-off approach. And I think maybe on a late night talk show, at an event at USC, maybe another time, he made some comments about how he thought the measure was a bad idea and kind of felt like those comments alone were his gift to his legacy. So for not being an action hero, for being an unaction hero in this Proposition 50 battle, Schwarzenegger was also a loser of the week. The next one is Republican National Committee man Jon Steele of California. And you may say, how can a Republican of any sort be a winner in the Prop 50? And I would just tell you that sometimes you can lose the war, but that doesn't mean that somebody doesn't emerge as an effective, capable leader, an active general on your side. And in this campaign against Prop 50, Jon Steele really stepped it up. He's a former party chairman. He's the current Republican National Committee man. And he went on a quest to try to get help out of Washington, D.C. for this measure. And while major support for Prop 50 never really materialized, they made a decision clearly back in Washington that the amount of money it would take to compete in California to stop this measure, based on the very smart framing of this measure as being anti-Trump, was way too expensive and would take way too much of the amount of money they have to fight in the other dozens of competitive races around the country. So they didn't really play in a big way. Still, somehow, unexpectedly, and this gets back to the game of expectations, Jon Steele was able to deliver over 10, I think maybe $11 million to the California Republican Party to do some sort of communicating on the measure, to at least get Republicans to know in some part that it was a bad idea. It was horribly, horribly underfunded, the no effort, but Jon exceeded in what he was doing. And then icing on the cake, Jon played a material role in getting the NRCC to fund the litigation that took place prior to the vote, when they attempted to get the California Supreme Court to not do what they normally do, to not be bitches for Gavin Newsom and company, but they didn't succeed. The Supreme Court didn't even give their litigation a hearing. But they're also now funding the current litigation that's going on in federal court afterwards. That remains to be seen what happens. Next winner, Paul Mitchell. No, not the hair guy, although this Paul Mitchell has great hair. Paul Mitchell runs a company called Redistricting Partners. He is kind of the lead redistricting expert in California, and I would argue around the country. And he's the person who was called upon to draw the lines, to figure out how to actually execute on the idea of, if we're going to put a new set of lines in front of voters, how do we make sure that the ones that they pass affect as few districts as possible, while at the same time accomplishing two things. One, taking 5 safe Republican seats and converting them to be 5 safe Democrat seats. And then how do we take a bunch of Democrat districts, maybe another 5 or so, that are marginal, that Democrats are in, but they're competitive, and lock them down so that they're no longer competitive. And Paul Mitchell did this with careful precision. And I would just tell you this funny story. While this Prop 50 language was going through the state legislature, for some reason, legislators didn't want to say that it was Paul who drew the lines. Like, they didn't want to say it. One of our rock stars in the California state legislature on the Republican side is Assemblywoman Alexandria Macedo. She's out of the Central Valley, and she's on the elections committee for the assembly. And in a hearing, she literally asked, like every Democrat in the room, who drew these lines? Who drew them? And they didn't want to say. They painfully and awkwardly would not say. And it was funny because at the same time, I'm listening to a recorded podcast that Paul did with the cool cats over at Capitol Weekly, where he was talking about how much fun he had drawing the lines. So I don't know why it was a big secret, but Paul, certainly for his creative artwork, was a winner. Another winner of the week was Jim DeBoo and his team. Who is Jim DeBoo? Jim's a seasoned campaign consultant in California, but he's also very, very tied to Gavin Newsom. For a time was his chief of staff inside of the government. but I think he's most comfortable outside of the government. He was the guy on the ground overseeing the Yes on 50 effort. So there were lots of different players, lots of different things that went right in a big way, but Jim was the responsible party. So as somebody myself, I've run and overseen a dozen successful ballot measures in states across the country. So I know what's involved with this sort of effort. So hats off. My world champion Los Angeles Dodgers, hats off to Jim. And Jim's on the list to represent all the professionals who really did a great job on this campaign. Now we can go to a loser, Charles Munger Jr. Some people may have heard of him. He's not a household name. Charles Munger Jr. is the scion, if that's the right way to pronounce the word, of Charles Munger Sr. Sorry, Jr. is the scion of Sr., right? And Sr. was business partners with Warren Buffett's business partner, billion-dollar business guy. Warren Buffett had billion-dollar Charles Munger Sr. And so Charles Jr. has inherited a lot of money, and he has spent a big chunk of it in politics. He was the primary spender to both qualify and pass these redistricting measures back in 2008, 2010. He even supported the earlier one that Schwarzenegger tried, I think back in 2006. Anyways, when this plan came out, Munger came out strongly against it during the legislative process, says, if you guys do this, I'm going to spend money. And he did, right out the gate. In fact, before I think the governor had even signed the bill after it had passed, he was on advertising, spent 32 million large very early in the process, long before people got their ballots, or maybe up until about the time people got ballots. And he was expecting a dance partner out of DC and a lot more money coming from Republicans who would have a self-interest in defeating the measure. That didn't materialize at the levels that Charles would have wanted. So he stopped investing after the 32 million, leaving between the Republican decision back in DC and Munger's decision here, leaving the no campaign virtually dark the last key 3 or 4 weeks of the campaign, if you can believe it. Munger is a political loser because this was his legacy, just like Schwarzenegger's, and it had a big hole blown in it. And he was a loser because he kind of got let down by other people that he thought would be in the dance with him. Another winner would be the team at Politico. For those of you who don't do it now, this is your opportunity to do it. Go to politico.com and sign up for their newsletters. Keep an eye on what they're doing. They have a robust reporting team for California. They owned the battlefield when it came to reporting on Proposition 50. I'm not saying that other news agencies didn't do their fair share of good reporting. The San Francisco Chronicle was notable, the Sacramento Bee, Cal Matters, Southern California News Group. So there was a lot of reporting, but nothing on the level of Politico. It was day in, day out, dozens of articles on aspects you wouldn't even think of. I mean, who writes an article not on which of Newsom's allies are funding Prop 50, but actually an article on which of Newsom's allies who have given in the past aren't funding it? That takes creativity. So the Politico team were winners, not only the reporters, the editors, the people that do the images and the sketches and all that stuff. They did a great job. I'd encourage you to go check them out. And then we're going to finish up with a couple more losers. One is Common Cause and the League of Women Voters. These groups purport to be like good government groups. They supported creating the California Independent Commission. But you know what they say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And these folks just cratered under the pressure of Gavin Newsom and what he was doing. These are groups that hands down should have been opposing this measure under the two wrongs don't make a right approach, and that California went out of its way to create a constitutional amendment and pass it to get rid of politicians picking their own voters. And they didn't. Instead, they went to the sidelines and sat it out. And it kind of reminded me, for those of you who've seen the movie Braveheart, I don't know if you remember that painful character, Robert the Bruce, who was the Scottish nobleman who at every turn allied with Braveheart, the Mel Gibson character, until he didn't, until they got to the point where, in order to feather his own nest and curry favor with the British crown, he sold out William Wallace to a most painful death. And so they get the Robert the Bruce Award, if that's such a thing. And then last but not least, the most painful part of this winners and losers list is actually a bunch of Republican members of Congress from California. Some of them are very close friends of mine. Some of them are friends of mine. Some of them I just know. One of them I just kind of know. But these 6 Republicans in Congress are the ones who, thanks to Paul Mitchell's map drawing, get really hosed under this plan. I'll kind of run through them real quick, kind of from north to south. So Kevin Kiley is a good friend, and Kevin Kiley has been a loud voice, especially an anti-Newsom voice, both when he was in the state assembly and in Congress. And his district got carved up into, I think, 6 different pieces. I think where he lives, he'd be running against Ami Berry, who's decided to jump in. He went from a district that was up a few points Republican that has now got a huge up Democrat percentage. He's going to have to decide what he wants to do. I think a couple of those districts are winnable for him with a hard charge, but they're going to be a hard fight. I guess his backdoor strategy would be 5% of his current district now overlaps with the district of Congressman Tom McClintock, the longtime multi-decade hero of conservatives in California. McClintock's district is not very much changed. He's safe, and he represents 80% of his new seat right now. I don't even know where the 5% overlap is that Kevin Kiley would maybe move to, but I guess he doesn't need to move to it. McClintock rather famously doesn't live in his district, so why would Kiley have to live in his? But it would be very unfortunate to see a GOP food fight there. I said I'd start north. I lied because there's a northerner, more congressman impacted, my friend Doug LaMalfa. Doug currently represents the state of Jefferson, which has a cohesive congressional seat, but not anymore. Half the state of Jefferson was cut up and is now sharing a district with Marin County. And, the first house north of the Golden Gate Bridge is in the same district as the last house when you cross somehow in the corner of the state between Nevada, California, and Oregon. Horrible gerrymander. And so those North State Republicans are now a minority vote in a safe Democrat seat. And then right below it, in a seat that was literally drawn for Senate President Mike McGuire. Like, it's an open seat. No one's in it. Carefully, Congressman Thompson, a Democrat, was drawn to be just a few miles down the road, so he's not in it. And the other part of the North State Jefferson seat that actually LaMalfa actually lives in is now carved in with wine country in Napa and Sonoma, at least Sonoma, and that Lake County and that whole area, which is very blue. And so Doug can run for the seat he lives in, and he may very well do that. It's a tough sled to do that. It's a really Democrat seat now. And then you go further south, David Valadao in the Central Valley has been valiantly holding on to a seat that repeatedly has had voter registration that advantages Democrats, but he's managed to be a bipartisan vote getter. I'm sure he'll run again, but they have shifted that district 5, 6, 7 points more Democrat. So it's going to make it a lot tougher for him. We can pass over Vince Fong in Bakersfield is safe. Jay Obernolte out in Big Bear in the high desert, he's safe. But then you come down into LA for the last coup de grace. Paul Mitchell's lines drew Ken Calvert and 50% of his current district into a new seat called the 40th District, which is confusing because Young Kim currently represents the 40th District, and about a third of her constituents are now in the new 40th. So these two Republicans have been thrust into a district together. Their homes are both in the district. I think you could actually throw a rock from Ken Calvert's front driveway into the neighboring district, but he's in it. And Young Kim is in it as well. And they have both announced for the seat. So it's going to be a big dogfight. I've handicapped that on sodoesitmatter.com. Just click on the archive button and type in Young Kim or Ken Calvert, and you'll pull up the whole analysis. Actually, and I think that's where you'd find it. And then last but not least, you have Congressman Darrell Issa, who his district, the 48th down in San Diego County, has been written instead of a ruby red safe Republican seat. It's now a lean Democrat seat that I think will be very, very hard for Issa to keep. Not impossible, but very, very hard. And there's been some open speculation, including by me, that Issa, who represents 15% of that other district where Young Kim and Ken Calvert are battling out, he might even do some polling to see whether he could drop in there. The big wild card where Issa is concerned is he's been very successful in business. I don't know if any of you, like me, installed one of those Cobra car alarms in your car when you were younger. I did. That was his company that he founded, and after he was done with a career in service in the military. So he's got a very strong resume as a business guy and a bunch of money to throw in if that's what he wants to do. Those are the winners and losers of the week in California politics for the week ending November 7th. I would ask you to like this, restack it, subscribe it, share it. All those things are very helpful for us. And then I guess I would say, as a closing editorial note, that not here on this particular video, because I like to target individuals, not broad groups, but maybe the biggest winners overall this week were Californians. I mean, they got pulled into a very cynical game of tit for tat. And I looked at the polling, and like 2/3 of the people who voted for the measure support the Independent Redistricting Commission. But due to a misleading ballot title and summary, lopsided funding to communicate yes, and not enough funding to vote no, I think a lot of people got suckered into voting the right way, or they got pulled into it emotionally, saying, hey, I want to make a statement about Donald Trump, who I don't like, without really paying a lot of attention that there was a very real fundamental change in the Constitution tied to that statement. It wasn't simply a statement about Donald Trump. It was a statement about disenfranchising millions of Republican voters in California, fundamentally unfair. So the voters lose. Anyways, that's what I got. Thank you very much. Take care.